Let's begin. Yeah, this is going to be a pretty serious game. 1900. Okay, so we've been playing e4 pretty exclusively. And we have been playing the 4-knight Scotch. How it holds up at this level. And this game is no exception. Okay, he takes d4. Knight takes d4. Okay, so even at this level, people still take on d4, which, as we've now discussed many times, is not a serious mistake, but definitely significantly inaccurate. It gives white. Ooh. Now, b6. I think we faced something very similar before. This is a really bad move because black is not sensing that stuff is about to go down in the center. We can go after black. We can go after black just with the move e5. That should be an instinct for you guys at this point. If you've watched the speedrun enough, you know that the move e5 and the 4-knight Scotch is incredibly strong in these types of positions. So bishop c5, this is what our opponent was relying on. But it's one move-itis, right? It's one move-itis. He thinks, oh, I'm attacking the queen and developing a piece, so it's good. But if you calculate further, the knight is going to have a very hard time finding a square. Now, where should the queen go? Well, here's the thing. If we go back to d1, I think that's a little bit passive, and that allows this move queen e7, pinning the pawn and attacking the pawn. I like either queen h4, which is a nice square out of the way of the other pieces, or my favorite square is actually the square f4. And this might not be intuitive to you. If you're looking at this and saying, how do I really come up with this square? Well, okay, our opponent is showing us why we come up with this square, because now we drop the queen back to f3, and this is, in my book, called a fork. Okay, this guy is really bad. I'm sorry, but he's playing really badly. Okay, he's like not even trying at all. This guy is not even trying at all. We're just going to bring our queen back. Yeah, we're going to play another game. I mean, there's not much to talk about here. 1962, I don't understand this at all. Queen h4. But let's not, lose our discipline. Let's continue to play accurately. Yeah, he's making superficial blitz moves. So here, I think, let's focus on the game, though, rather than fooling around. Let's actually try to be accurate. So rather than, again, what should be the approach here should be to complete the development, because we still have not completed our development, and we need to try to castle as quickly as we can. Now, if you ask yourself that question, how do we castle as quickly as we can? To me, it makes more sense to castle queenside. Like, we have the option of castling queenside, especially because we have the potential to play this move bishop e3, which contests black's only strong piece, which is the bishop on c5, and prepares to castle queenside. Simple, strong, and winning. Simple, strong, and winning. So d6. Yeah, okay, we can take on c5. We can castle it. It really doesn't matter. Oh, castles, maybe there's bishop g4. I guess that's black's idea. Let's start by simplifying with takes. Okay, so now we just need to solve one small problem, which is that if we castle, black has this move bishop g4, pinning the queen to the rook. That, by the way, would not be the end of the world. We'd still be up a piece. So yeah, Ardebir is suggesting a move that I really like, which is just to play bishop e2. Now remember, in such situations, your priority is to castle and complete your development. It doesn't really matter how actively you develop your pieces. For God's sake, you're up a rook. So once all of this is done, you'll move the same pieces to more active squares. That doesn't matter. What matters is just to complete your development. Okay, so now we have a really nice move here. Which is this move queen to e4, centralizing our queen and preparing to simplify further with bishop takes h5 and offering a queen trade. Yeah, a3 was also possible. We could have chased the queen away with a3, but I like this move more because, okay, well, now we obviously take the queen. We can go knight d5 and we can win. Yeah, this wasn't a very serious game, unfortunately. Okay, so now let's stick our knight on f6. And one quick way that we can try to win this is just by pushing the kingside pawns, because we have a majority. Okay, we have two plans that I see. The first is to double on the d file. We can play like rook d2, rook d1, and rook d8. But you know what move is super classy? There's a super classy move that we can make here. It completely restricts black's knight. If you watched Hess enough, you will know that Hess likes these kinds of moves. Look at this knight for a second. It can go out to f5, so we play the move g4. We restrict this knight, and you should be familiar with this setup, the fact of the pawn being, two squares being between the pawn and the knight, and they being in the same file. And now, rather than dilly-dallying, let's stick our rook on d6, go rook d1, rook d8, and win the game. Yeah, this is rook d1, and rook d8 is unstoppable. Yeah, diamond pawns, that's true. Oh, we lost the pawn. Yeah. Oh, damn. I think we should. Yeah. Damn it. I missed that. Yeah. No, there's no hope continuing the game now. We lost our a2 pawn. I don't know how we can continue functioning without that pawn, really. Yeah, we can't. We lost the a pawn. I mean, that just honestly, you know, we might have to hold a funeral for it. By the way, here, folks, just remember this mating net. After king g7, we would have gone g5 in order to set up rook g8 mate. Okay, I'm sorry, very underwhelming game, but maybe we'll get a better one next time. So, a couple of pointers. And you can learn from every game. I think one thing I want to make clear to you guys is that, you know, if your time is limited, then you need to put every minute that you spend on chess to good use. And part of that, in my opinion, is to squeeze the juice out of every single game. No matter how bad or good the game was, there's usually some lesson that you can extract from it, something that you can reaffirm, some concept that maybe you already know, but that you review, which is, it's always good to review the stuff you already know. And I think here the concept is, first of all, that people don't know how to play against the 4-knight Scotch, even at this level. Once you take on d4, black is best advised to play d6 here. I mean, you have to stop e5. But our opponent succumbed to one-move-itis. He thought, oh, I get the bishop out with tempo. The thing is, that doesn't matter. Queen f4 is, I think, a really nice move. And you basically use process of elimination to decide where to put the queen, okay? So I don't like queen d1 because of this move, queen to e7, attacking the pawn. Hopefully that makes sense. For the same reason, I don't like the moves queen d3 or queen c4. So we need a move that keeps contact with this pawn. And for the same reason, I don't like queen h4, because black has queen e7, and somehow black is kind of getting out here. Does that make sense? After queen f4, if black plays queen e7, our hands are untied. Our pawn is no longer hanging. Now the pawn is still pinned, but we can easily unpin the pawn with bishop e2. The knight has to move back, which is a disaster, because now our knight leaps into d5, and the rest is, you know, just a huge initiative. So queen f4, I think, is a pretty subtle move, and it's nice. Okay, then we go back to f3. Now, whenever you take this rook on a8, you always have to be a little bit careful, because I'm sure you guys are aware that there are variations where the queen on a8 gets trapped. I'm sure you know such lines where you take a rook in the corner and then your opponent sets up, you know, something like this and then is able to trap the queen. I'm sure this is a concept you're familiar with. So, but obviously here, the black is nowhere close to this. And I think a lot of beginners are afraid to take the pawn on b7 or to take the rook in the corner because they fear that their queen is going to get trapped. But you can't just be afraid of something without calculating it and concretizing it. And here, concretely, there's nothing. So, but still, you shouldn't play with fire. I mean, if you're given the opportunity, you should get your queen back. And we don't really care about this pawn. I'm happy to lose this pawn. Okay, so bishop b3, castling queenside, prioritizing completion of development, and then using the threat of simplification to essentially make improvements to your position, trading queens, sticking the knight on an outpost, restricting our opponent's knight, and then doubling on the only open file and delivering checkmate on the 8th rank. Easy, lemon squeezy. Questions about this game? What's bad about queen d1, queen e7, queen e2, asks Dr. Lord. Nothing. Queen e2 is great, actually. No, this is probably good, too. Yeah, somehow I didn't see queen e2, to be honest with you. Queen e2 is good. It's a little bit awkward because it blocks the bishop, but it also forces knight g8. I agree with you. Although I would say that, yeah, because the queen blocks the bishop, you can do this, but wouldn't you love to be able to go bishop c4 here and attack f7? Right? Here you have to waste another tempo moving your queen out of the way and going like queen f3. White is much better. I'm not disputing that white is not much better. White is much better, but I think with the queen being on f4, you can do this in one fell swoop. Yeah, so in the Vienna Gambit, this is what you're referring to. If you play the Vienna, you should know this line where e takes f4, which is a big mistake, but a lot of beginners play this. The move is d5 here, by the way. After ef4, one of the first things I taught my student who plays the Vienna is this line, queen e7. Now you play queen e2, and that forces the knight back to g8. You develop your knight to f3 in order to prevent the check on h4. And a lot of people lose the game immediately here with d6. White plays knight d5, and you're busted. The queen has to come back. And now if you want to be really sexy, take on c7 first before taking on d6. Both moves win on the spot. because after queen c7, ed wins the queen. So this is a nice trap in the Vienna that you should be aware of. Okay, we have another black game, so maybe Artie will get his wish. No, okay, so we'll play the Queen's Gambit declined structure, which I promised to do. We'll play Queen's Gambit declined, which is e6, of course. And one of the good things about being a Queen's Gambit declined player is that you don't really need to study the English. That's a huge, huge benefit, right? It just cuts the amount of work you have to do because you can play e6. And white has ways of avoiding the Queen's Gambit decline, but not many of them. Most of the time, you find English players end up going d4. White can, so white plays this in the sort of traditional English manner. This is really the only way of doing that. There's a high probability of transposition to the Catalan. So if white plays d4 at any moment now, we get a Catalan. If white plays this with b3, then we get a more traditional English reverse Benoni structure. But again, white takes on d5 prematurely. This is a bad move. This releases the central tension. It gives us a better control of the center. And it's completely and totally toothless. So I feel like people at this level who play this stuff still don't fully comprehend the reason behind this opening, d4. Okay, so we need to figure out how to position our minor pieces. And there is not one correct answer here. There's multiple ways of developing, but I am very partial to putting this bishop on d6. I like putting it on d6 and then following up sort of London system style with the move c6, just like we did in the previous game. Now, we don't need to play c6 immediately. We can castle first. Let's castle first. It doesn't really matter what order you do things in here. This isn't a Najdorf. This isn't a sharp opening. You can do stuff in many, many different move orders. And now I like the move c6. Just look at how nice this looks. c6, d5. We've got a bishop in the middle there. Now, where should the light skirt bishop go? Start thinking about that. And should it stay on c8? Maybe we should go knight bd7. And if it should develop, where should it go? f5, g4, e6. Which square are you partial to? Well, if you're a London system player, then you should already be biased toward f5. Yeah, bishop f5 is where we want to put it. White prevents it with queen c2. Okay, that's not a problem. Now, we have a pretty radical move. We can play g6 and prepare bishop f5, but obviously g6 is very weakening, especially because we're not fianchettoed on g6. So bishop g6 is interesting. I don't think it's a terrible move. But here's my proposal. Let's start by playing a very flexible move. Let's see how white positions his pieces, and then we will decide how what we do. So what's an example of a flexible move? A move that we know for a fact is going to be helpful is rook e8. We know that this move is not going to hurt us. How do we know that? Well, the rook is just good on e8. We're also preventing knight to e5, which in some situations, followed by f4, is quite annoying. Now I want to show you guys a very typical maneuver that allows us to get this bishop onto this diagonal without playing g6, which I really don't want to play. So we first play bishop g4, and then we swing the bishop around from h5, and we don't need to do this immediately. The bishop is quite happy on g4, but white has played h3. We drop the bishop back, and then we're really happy if we can get it to g6. Does that make sense? That is an idea I'm sure that some of you have seen before. I will show you an example of something very, very similar in a classical Alekhine game afterwards. But also remember that we can stay on h5 for a while. We don't need to automatically go bishop g6 immediately. In fact, we're not going to. We're going to stay flexible here. What should we do? Now, I'm sure that some of you are tempted to play h6 here, which is a completely fine move, but I would not like to take on f6 with the queen. I would like the queen to be able to access the other side of the board if necessary. So let's go knight bd7 as we have planned. And on the next move, we might very seriously consider the move h6. So white plays a3. Now, it is quite clear that white is preparing to expand on the queen side with b4. That is not a particularly scary idea given how white has positioned his pieces. So I'm going to make an interesting point to you guys. 99% of people here would play a5 automatically. But what I want to show you is that you can allow b4 in these types of positions and then play the move a6 and freeze that pawn in place. And it's actually not that great for white. So we're going to ignore that idea entirely, and we're going to play the move h6, forcing this bishop to decide. I'm anticipating bishop takes f6. Okay, bishop e3 is a blunder. Why is it a blunder? This is a common idea. I can't tell you how much this is missed. So the bishop on e3, what can you tell me about it? Well, any contact between two pieces is something I've told you to notice. If you notice this contact, you say, well, what is defending the bishop? Oh, it's the pawn on f2. What else is the pawn on f2 defending? Ah, it's defending the g3 pawn. It is overloaded. It's overloaded. Now, white has a counter desperado with bishop takes h6. I am hoping that our opponent plays it because we have a very instructive response to that move. Hopefully the logic makes sense. Okay, he takes. Unfortunately, I'll show this after the game. We take on e3. We are in fantastic shape here. Our next move is very likely to be queen d8 to e7 in order to increase our control of the d5. But, oh, actually we have a better move, I think. So rather than going to e7, right? Rather than going to e7, where else can we go with the queen? What else exists? What are the other options? Yeah, I think queen c7. I think queen c7 is a nice looking move because we're hitting white where it hurts on g3. And we are preparing to double rooks with rook a to e8. Oh, well, now we're definitely going to double rooks. Actually, wait a second. If we want to end the game, we would play bishop g6 here. If we want to try to end the game quickly. But we're going to play rook a e8 instead. We're going to take this slow. Because the reason I was saying bishop g6 is a tricky move is because queen d2 would have blundered. Okay. Whoa. Oh, my lands. There's some cool stuff going on here. Wait a second. Oh, I think it's time for tactics, ladies and gentlemen. I think the time has come. Actually, maybe we can just drop the rook back to e7. There are interesting tactics here, but I'm not totally convinced that it's worth going for them. And I'm going to be super annoying because, yeah, I'm thinking about knight e4 check. The problem with knight e4 check is not that white takes the rook on e3. That's winning. I admit that that's winning. Thank you, I need a drink. The problem with knight e4 check is that white goes king g1. And then somehow the rook on e3 is actually trapped. So it's not so easy there to prove full compensation for the exchange. And it's not necessary. But what is the point of the speedrun? The point of the speedrun is to show you how I would play in these situations. And I've said this before, I will say it again. If you want to be a sacrificial attacking player, I think the biggest hallmark of people like Tal, and Morphy, those players, is that they know when to play it simple, right? They know in which situations just to play a simple move and win the game without adventures and wrap it up. Because if you're always going for the brilliancy prize and you're always going for the cool moves, then you're going to leave a lot of points on the table through unnecessary sacrifices and moves that you know you shouldn't be playing. Look at this. This is so much easier. Just queen takes g3. And this is game over. I mean, that's the second pawn. We have a rook lift to g6 coming up. Okay, now we have a winning sequence. We have a two-move sequence that wins the game immediately. Who can find it? Who can find it? It's very simple. I mean, it's just boom, boom. Just boom, boom. Very good. Shrew Master Knight. So it's all about order of operations here. Yeah, we can do it in either order, but the best order is to play knight takes f2 first, and then after rook takes f3 to play bishop takes f3. It's actually quite a bit more accurate than bishop takes f3, which a lot of you guys were suggesting. Because I'll show this after the game. This is less accurate. This is more accurate. The game is over because white cannot capture the bishop in any of the three ways. This is illegal. This blunders the rook, and this blunders the rook. Okay, now let's finish white off. Let's not give white any breathing room at all. And if you want to do that, then what is the most decisive move here? What is the most decisive move? Let's go. Rook takes e2. Rook takes e2 is crushing because if white plays rook takes f3, you say, well, white's counterattacking the queen. Don't forget that the bishop on g2 is going to be hanging with checkmate. We take on e2 and we win the game. Easy, 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 easy. And very passive play by white. Very, very, very passive. I don't know who recommended this repertoire to white, but it's not a good one. So c4, e6. So white decided to start by playing this like in English. Now, once again, d4 in this position would lead us into a Catalan. And I would say the Catalan is like super unpopular below 2300. It's not that you can't study it if you're like 1700, but I wouldn't recommend it to anybody under 2200, really. Because of how complex it is, because of how much theory there is. You have to be okay playing down a pawn for long periods of time, which is not an easy skill. So I wouldn't really recommend the Catalan to anybody. Okay, c takes d5 is just really bad. If white wants to play this like in English, the way to do that is to play bishop g2. Now, black can take on c4 in any of these positions, and that's a legitimate sideline. The most popular move is to play this like a Queen's Gambit declined. Bishop e7, castles, castle. Now, again, d4 is the Catalan, but b3 is like the traditional English way of playing it. And in this position, black has a gazillion moves. You can play this like a Benoni with d4, and then you get a Benoni structure, e3, c5. I've played this with white. You can play this more sort of Queen's Gambit-y with c5. You can play the move a5, which was pretty popular until recently. I mean, there's a ton of moves here. Even b6 is very solid, like a Queen's Indian. This is about equal, but it's a very interesting. You can play this line. This line is cool. But cd5 is totally toothless. It yields the center. It gives our bishop the chance to develop, and white is just slightly worse here, probably, if anything. So bishop g2, castles, castles. We play c6. I hope that this setup makes sense. A lot of beginners tend to play knight c6 in these positions, and this stems from a lack of understanding of the sort of positional properties of this line, or of d4 openings in general, because you have to keep the d5 pawn under lock and key. If you play knight c6 in these types of positions, what tends to happen is that white plays knight c3, and then white plays bishop g5, and you're already experiencing problems with the d5 pawn. By the way, the same exact thing goes for the Caro-Kann. When you're a beginner, a lot of beginners, what they do against the Caro-Kann is they play knight c3. Super, super common. I've even had some students who play this who are not beginners. And this is bad for exactly the same reason. The pawn on d4 becomes a serious weakness because you can't defend it because you've blocked the c-pawn. And black has the ways and means to attack that pawn. Queen b6, bishop g4 in response to knight f3. That knight on c3 is neither here nor there. So it's very important across many different openings not to block your c-pawn in general. That's why we played c6. Now, last thing I want to say is that why are a lot of newer players worried about putting a pawn on c6? Because I think the way that some players are taught, they're taught that unless you develop your knights to f3 and c3 and c6 and f6, that somehow you're making a concession. That somehow developing the knight on d7 is automatically passive. And that could not be further from the truth. And as you get a little bit stronger, you have to start approaching development with a lot more flexibility. So the move c6 is kind of a no-brainer. Queen c2, rook e8, so we just decide to play flexibly. Knight c3, and now bishop g4. And on this topic, I would like to show you guys a interesting application of this exact concept. Okay, so we have Karpov-Kasparov from their 1985 match. And in this position, I really like what Kasparov does here. It's like a super high-level positional concept. Well, let's flip the board. So Gary starts with this move that I think a lot of people wouldn't play. He plays this move a5. And it's a very annoying move to face because if you allow black to expand on the queen side with a4, well, that's annoying, right? You're not going to have as much real estate on the queen side to operate. So Karpov goes a4. But what is the drawback of this move? Well, the drawback of this move is that it weakens the b4 square and you stick a bishop there. So these kinds of ideas like pushing a pawn forward to grab some space and provoke a weakness, very important, right? But after king e2, this is the reason why I'm showing you this position in the first place. I'll give you a chance to think. What did Kasparov do in this position? What maneuver? Ooh, there's a moth. What maneuver did he come up with? One second, let me try to kill this moth. Goodbye. Okay, what did he do? What did he do? Yeah, so he plays bishop g4 check. f3 and bishop h5. Same exact idea as in my game. 3 bishop h5. And yeah, conquerors are so hard to bring down. It's crazy. Like, you just smash it and it just still lives. Castles, and then bishop g6. And the point of this move is to trade white's only active piece, which is the light squared bishop. And without the light squared bishop, white is stuck with this really awkward piece and this really awkward piece. And his whole position is just entirely discombobulated. So I just thought this was similar. Just this concept of maneuvering this bishop around to g6 is something to consider when you cannot access this diagonal directly, if that makes sense. Okay. When you cannot access this diagonal directly. Yeah, all of this for structure and for squares. I mean, that's just the nature of what you do. So that's kind of what we did here. We go bishop h5. Now, we don't go bishop g6 immediately. We chill, but we have this threat. The threat is strong in the execution. So now we go h6. And bishop e3 is just really, really underwhelming. Now, okay, well, if bishop takes f6, knight f6, and b4, what I wanted to point out is that just because your opponent has played this move doesn't necessarily mean anything. You just play a6. You just play a6, and white can never really play a4. White can't even go rook b1 because of bishop g6. So, if anything, b4 creates a major hole on c4, if that makes sense. How bad is it to push g6 to prepare the bishop move instead? No, well, not bad. I was talking about that during the game. I didn't want to play g6 here because I was worried about bishop g5. This seemed annoying to me. And you could argue, bishop f5, queen b3 is what was annoying in particular, because now you can't play queen b6 because the knight is going to hang. This is exactly what I was trying to avoid with the move g6. So that's why we came up with this idea of circumventing it. Okay, so bishop e3 is obviously a blunder. We take g3. And I was really hoping that white would play this move, because I think it affords us an opportunity to play something very instructive. Now, most of you are probably looking at this and saying, okay, bishop takes f2 check is what occurs to you. I am quite confident of that. And then you play g takes h6. But don't stop there. Yes, you have won a pawn. Yes, you've won a pawn. But you've also weakened your own king side. And you've given white the opportunity to double rooks. And now knight e5 becomes a problem. So this, I would say, is very unconvincing for black. Instead, I think black is a really, really powerful move. Essentially, you have a couple of tempi. If you move your bishop back, white is going to have to waste the tempo moving his own bishop back. So if you've decided to move your bishop, you should think about where you want to move it and for what reason. You have eliminated the pawn on g3, which is the important fact. What clue does that give you? If there's no pawn on g3, then this diagonal is now a serious liability. Well, what is the best way to arrange pieces in a diagonal? It is to play bishop b8. So bishop all the way back in only there. And then queen c7 with the tremendous threat of bishop takes f3 and queen h2 check. And this looks really, really bad for white. This is a super nice move. Bishop back to b8. Right? Using the absence of the g3 pawn to build a battery against the h2 square. I love retreating moves like that. They're so subtle and so nice. Unfortunately, our opponent just sort of, ceded the game without much resistance. But notice how we converted our advantage, right? Queen c7, attacking the g3 pawn. We're not letting white breathe. Rook a e8. And then the main moment came here. I was really tempted by this move as well. Now, knight e4 check, why is it tempting? Well, it's a rook sacrifice. Don't tell Maria the 300 bits. And I won't tell her, promise. King takes e3. So this position is winning because white's king is simply, how do I describe the state of white's king? There's no squares, and if it goes to d3, you can drop your bishop. You know what I love is that we finally play bishop g6 here, and we waited until the best possible moment to do it, when we have the deadly skewer pin discovery against white's queen on the next move. Now, what's the problem? Gumby with the bits, let's go. The problem is that white plays this move king g1. White plays this move king g1. And all of a sudden, the rook is trapped. If you look at it carefully, the rook is trapped. Now, is black winning? Absolutely. What should black do here? Well, probably black should play knight takes g3. White plays knight takes e3. And now not knight takes f1 because of knight takes f1. Alaska chess with the 5. Holy smokes. But rook takes e3. And white plays rook f2. And black has 2 pawns for the exchange and overwhelmingly placed pieces. But why have we given up an exchange exactly? What has been the purpose of that other than to look cool for a move? You see what I'm saying now? So rather than engaging in all of that, Spaceship Trucker with a gifted sub. Holy smoke. Anita with a sub. We are not even stopping here. Jesus. We just move the rook back to e7. We keep all of the advantages of the position, including the deadly threat of knight e4 check. Now, white could have been more resilient. Absolutely. You know, our opponent could have maybe played g4 to get the pawn out of g3, or maybe played knight c3 here to discourage knight e4. Oh my god! Oh my lands, girl. Did I just see 5069 from an anonymous cheerer? Who is this? What is going on? Yeah, don't tell me that's the shroom guy again. Yeah, I know he's in the chat. Oh my god. 5069. Unbelievable. Total Giga Chad. But just to finish the thought, what would we have done here? Well, probably we would go knight e4 check anyway, maybe. Oh, and then d takes c4 and e3 check. And e3 check is coming. So we are winning this way and that way. But this is a much simpler move. This is a much, much simpler move. Then we go knight e4. Last thing I wanted to discuss. Why did I do queen takes g3 rather than knight takes g3? It doesn't matter. Knight takes g3 is completely winning too. But after rook f2, my guess was that I would have to move back to e4 anyway. And I thought that the queen on g3 is just a much better attacker. Even though this move is not technically with tempo. Knight f2. Oh, and the last thing, why didn't I take on f3 first? Because move order matters. We know that. Thank you, Anonymous. Thank you, Plongo. But after e takes f3 here, if you play knight takes f2, white can actually play queen takes f2, and somehow white avoids losing a piece. Because the black queen is hanging. And if you take, then white takes with the king. Thank you, Alf Matthews. Okay, black is completely winning here. Obviously, completely winning. 2 pawns up. But in the other move order, you actually win a piece. In the other move order, you actually win a piece. You take on f2, then you take on f3, and here you actually win the piece. Yeah. Okay, rook e f1, and bang, rook takes e2, not letting white breathe. Pretty easy win. I mean, where were the pivotal moments of this game? I think bishop g4 was a really good decision by us to get this bishop around to g6. Instructive idea, right? Just because you can't get the bishop on one square of the diagonal doesn't mean that you can't get it onto another. And it also doesn't mean that you shouldn't play g6 ever. I can give you scenarios where this idea of going g3 bishop f4 or g6 bishop f5 is the only way that you should continue. But in this case, you just have a different way of doing this without weakening your king side. Yeah, then bishop h5. Then obviously our opponent blunders with bishop e3. We notice tactics, even in quiet positions. Pawn is overloaded, and the rest of the game was easy. The dollar amount that Shrooms ended was unbelievable. Micro Popper 9487. Give me those primes. Give me those primes. Holy smokes. Okay. And that's that. Was c5 knight c6 too adventurous instead of c6 in that position? Well, let's take a look. Artie Bear is suggesting the move c5. Well, okay, c5 I just don't like because I don't like c5 because I don't like this because you get an isolated queen pawn position. And white's pieces, you're essentially justifying the placement of the bishop is what I'm trying to say. You're justifying the placement of the bishop, which is now pressuring this pawn. And if you play d4 too early, you don't solve all of your problems because white has this move knight a4 in these types of positions. And you've bitten off more than you can chew. In comparison to c6, I feel like there is no compare. Is c6 still good if white hasn't fianchettoed light square bishop? Good question. The answer is yes. I mean, if you're a Queen's Gambit decline player, you should know the Carlsbad structure. You should know that in the Carlsbad structure, white plays e3, bishop d3, yes, and black still plays c6. I mean, this is just a pawn chain, right? This is neither particularly good, but certainly not particularly bad. It's a nice pawn chain, you know, but in the Carlsbad, yeah, you get this pawn chain and you keep playing. So the answer is yes, you definitely still play c6, even if white doesn't fianchetto. But just the concept of restricting your opponent's pieces, right? Very, very important. Using your pawns to shape the position in your favor. Something that I think a lot of players struggle with, even though it's actually quite a simple concept. But this idea that you shouldn't be afraid to use your pawns to make your opponent's pieces a lot more useless than they are. And I think an example that I have shown before on stream, and that I will show again, is a Steinitz game. This is where classical games, like games played 100 plus years ago, are really, really good, because they really have these ideas in pure form. Because the games tended to be a lot simpler, if that makes sense. So you don't have as much fluff. You have, you know, you have pretty clear illustrations of a lot of these concepts. So this position, Steinitz is black. What do you guys think he played? And he made a very simple move here. A simple series of moves, but still very instructive. So he plays b6, yeah. And he does that to restrict the knight. English plays h3. Steinitz drops the bishop back. And who can tell me how Steinitz followed up? And this next move is really the instructive part of the sequence. Yeah, he goes c5. So look at how he uses his pawns to take away all of these key squares from the knight and the bishop. Now you might say, okay, great, but what is that leading into? Well, what it's leading into, and Steinitz spends a while just expanding a little bit on the king side, and he gets the d file, and then he expands further, and then in this position, he carries out yet another instructive idea. Yet another instructive idea. What idea does he carry out? You have fully restricted your opponent's pieces. Now it's time to make even further progress and push white's pieces off the edge. Yeah, a5. a5 is super, super classic. This knight on b3 is going to get pushed away. You can't play a4 because you drop the knight. So Steinitz advances the pawn to a4. He literally pushes white off the board. Look at this position. White can't breathe. And Steinitz ends up winning the game pretty quickly. And I'll show one other example of something like this from one of my games. How, you know, do I actually learn from this kind of stuff? Well, the answer is yes. Here's a game where I applied a very similar idea, and an idea that dovetails also into what we talked about through the lens of the game that I just played. So I drew this game ended in a draw, but that no matter, because that's not the point. This position, in this position, I found an idea that I was really, really happy with during the game. I'll give you guys a chance to find it. Black to play. So the position seems pretty colorless. It's an isolated queen pawn position, but clearly black's pieces are quite active. Yeah, so I played... Okay, not a6. Yeah, I played g6. My opponent castles. And how did I follow up? Like, g6 is pretty obvious because you restrict the knight. But how did I follow up? h5. h5, exactly. h5. Then I play h4. And actually, if white had not gone b4... then I would have followed up with bishop f5. And look how my pieces come alive here. Like, the position changes completely. So you send that pawn forward. And a lot of people, when they look at this, they say, I get the idea, but I don't understand how you know that you can just weaken the king like this. So the reason is that, first of all, g6 is not a serious weakness. You're not actually weakening the king all that much by playing these moves. Right, this misconception that pushing pawns in front of the king is bad. Yes, it usually is, but it depends on how you push those pawns. The second thing is that white has absolutely no firepower to ever attack the king side in the near future. Now, is it possible that at some point black's strategy will backfire, that white will somehow assemble king side pieces? Yeah, absolutely. But you can't play chess like that. You can't guarantee safety from everything. You know what I'm saying? So this is a classic idea, one of my favorites, this concept of going g6 and then shoving the g knight off the board with h5, h4. Okay, so a little bit of a detour there, but hope you found that to be somewhat enlightening. Yeah, the minority attack, of course, is a very serious idea, and it's one of the main plans for white on the Carlsbad, but in this specific game, the minority attack was not scary because white's bishop was so misplaced.